The Knights Templar, a famous medieval military order, have long been the subject of legend and theories. One of the most persistent claims is that the Templars secretly worshipped a mysterious idol called Baphomet, a charge first levied against them during their 14th century trials. The term Baphomet first appeared decades before the Templars' trials during the Crusades. In a 1098 letter, a crusader described the Muslim Turks at the siege of Antioch, calling upon Baphomet, which most scholars interpret as a corruption of Muhammad. Medieval European crusaders generally mischaracterized Islam as idolatry. They believed Muslims worshipped Muhammad as their god. By the late 13th and early 14th century, Baphomet had thus entered the Christian lexicon as a term connoting a pagan or false idol. Against this backdrop, the Knights Templar fell under suspicion. On October 13th, 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the mass arrest of the Templars in France, motivated largely by his debts to the wealthy order and a desire to seize their assets. Philip, with the cooperation of Pope Clement V's inquisitors, accused the Templars of numerous heresies. Over 100 charges were leveled against the order, including denial of Christ, spitting on the cross, illicit practices, and worshipping an idol named Baphomet. Notably, many of these accusations mirrored those earlier aimed at other enemies of the Church, such as the Cathars, suggesting a template of charges rather than unique misdeeds. Under the pressure of torture and imprisonment by the medieval Inquisition, some Templars confessed to these charges. The idol of Baphomet featured in several such confessions, though descriptions of it varied wildly. According to the trial records, different Templars gave contradictory accounts. Some described a head, others an idol with 3 faces, and others spoke of a human skull or a cat figure as the object of veneration. It's important to note that no physical idol or tangible evidence of Baphomet was ever produced. The name Baphomet itself didn't even appear in the initial arrest warrants or the formal papal charges. Those documents only generically accused the Templars of adoration of idols. The specific name emerged from the interrogations, suggesting it was driven by the questions or expectations of the inquisitors. Of 231 knights interrogated in Paris, only 12, barely 5%, confessed, under torture, to knowing anything about Baphomet. Notably, far greater numbers confessed to other charges, such as more routine claims of blasphemy. This disparity indicates that even under extreme duress, the Baphomet charge was not widely substantiated compared to more mundane forced confessions. However, the inquisitors didn't take this to mean that Baphomet didn't exist as an object of worship, but rather that the Templars held Baphomet so dear they wouldn't name the idol. During the trials, many Templars withdrew or recanted their confessions when not facing torture, and contemporaries were often skeptical of the more outlandish accusations. Even Pope Clement V initially doubted Philip's allegations. Outside France, papal investigations in other regions such as England, Portugal, and the Holy Roman Empire found little evidence of heresy. Many Templars in those regions were eventually exonerated or given light penances. In France, however, Philip's political pressure prevailed. The Templars' Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, after years of imprisonment, dramatically retracted his forced confession and declared the order's innocence. For his audacity, he was put to the torch in 1314. Modern historians widely agree that the Templars' supposed worship of Baphomet was a false charge lacking any genuine proof. The overwhelming consensus was that the confessions were both coerced and unreliable, and relied upon typical methods associated with the Inquisition. Notably, many contemporaries didn't believe the Baphomet confessions to be legitimate. However, they did suspect that many Templars had become crypto-Muslims. Modern historians generally dismiss the idea that the Templars would suddenly, en masse, adopt the doctrines of their mortal enemies. That said, there were cases of individual Templars converting to Islam. Robert of St. Albans, an English Templar, became Muslim and joined up with Saladin in the 1180s. For this action, he was granted the right to marry one of Saladin's relatives. These acts shocked Christendom and may have led to the idea that Templars harbored secret sympathy for their enemies. Importantly, no credible evidence has ever emerged that the Templars venerated anything called Baphomet. Although the Templars were dissolved, then subsequently exonerated by the Church in later years, the lurid idea of their occult practices didn't vanish. After centuries of obscurity, the Baphomet legend was revived in the 19th century amid a resurgence of interest in the Templars, Freemasonry, and the occult. Enlightenment and Romantic era writers began speculating about what hidden wisdom the Templars might have possessed. In 1818, Austrian Orientalist Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall published an essay that claimed to find Templar Baphomet idols and linked the order to Gnostic sects. Famously, a major turning point came with French occultist Eliphas Levi. In the mid-19th century, he famously illustrated Baphomet as the Sabbatic goat, a winged, goat-headed androgynous figure laden with esoteric symbolism. Levi took the name Baphomet, which he believed the Templars had used, and transformed it into a symbol of cosmic balance in his occult philosophy. Since this time, Levi's goat-like depiction of Baphomet has become the best-known image of this entity. That said, it's important to remember that the Sabbatic goat was never historically associated with the Templars, nor was it based on contemporary Inquisition accusations. The idea that the Templars worshipped a demon named Baphomet is in essence a myth, but it's a myth that still has a ton of cultural weight almost a millennium later. The Honjo Masamune is often regarded as the ultimate samurai sword, a legendary blade forged by the master swordsmith Masamune in medieval Japan. For centuries it was treasured as a symbol of authority, representing the power of the Tokugawa regime during the Edo period. The sword was so esteemed that it was designated a national treasure of Japan in 1939. However, despite its celebrated status, the Honjo Masamune vanished in the aftermath of World War II, leaving behind a mystery that endures to this day. The story of the Honjo Masamune begins with its creator, Goro Masamune, who lived in the late 13th to early 14th century. Masamune is revered as Japan's greatest swordsmith, known for developing revolutionary forging techniques that produced blades of unparalleled quality. The Honjo Masamune itself gained its name and fame in the Sengoku, or Warring States period. In 1561, a samurai general named Honjo Shiganaga acquired the sword during a fierce battle. As the story goes, Shiganaga was attacked by an enemy wielding this Masamune blade. The sword struck Shiganaga's helmet and split it, though he somehow survived the blow unharmed. Shiganaga defeated his attacker and claimed the sword as one of the spoils of war, and thereafter the blade came to be known by his name, Honjo Masamune. Honjo Shiganaga eventually sold the prize sword to the Toyotomi clan. The Honjo Masamune passed through the hands of powerful figures in Japan. It was first owned by Toyotomi Hidetsugu, the nephew of the warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi eventually came to possess it himself, and from there it came into the possession of Tokugawa Ieyasu. Tokugawa Ieyasu founded the Tokugawa shogunate, and after he became shogun in 1603, the sword became a part of the Tokugawa family's treasures. For over 2.5 centuries of the Edo period, the sword was a ceremonial blade symbolizing the shogun's authority, handed down through generations of Tokugawa rulers. The tumult of World War II set the stage for the Honjo Masamune's disappearance. In 1945, Japan's surrender brought an Allied occupation government that mandated the disarmament of the population. All Japanese citizens, including former samurai aristocracy, were ordered to surrender all weapons, which also included priceless antique swords. The Honjo Masamune held by the Tokugawa family was not spared. In December 1945, its custodian Tokugawa Ieyasu complied with the order. He turned over the Honjo Masamune, along with several other priceless family swords, to the Majiro police station in Tokyo. The understanding was that these swords were to be kept safe and may eventually be returned to the family during the process of rebuilding Japan. In January 1946, the surrendered swords were handed over by the police to a U.S. officer from the Foreign Liquidation Commission. But there was just one problem. He identified himself by the traditional all-American name, Coldy Bymore. Now, unsurprisingly to any native English speaker, Coldy Bymore wasn't a name that corresponded to any real American serviceman. After that transfer, the trail went cold. The sword never appeared in any official records or collections again, effectively vanishing from history. The fate of the weapon has been the subject of much speculation. Over the decades, historians, sword enthusiasts, and treasure hunters have proposed several theories about what became of this legendary blade. One possibility is that the legendary weapon was inadvertently destroyed along with many other surrendered swords. During the occupation, many confiscated swords were dumped at sea or melted down. It's conceivable the Honjo Masamune was unknowingly destroyed along with those piles of blades. Under this theory, the American handlers failed to realize its significance, believing it was a mass-produced sword from the war. Personally, I have some doubts about this given the appearance of the Masamune swords, which are clearly of extremely high quality even to a non-expert. Another theory is that Coldy Bymore, whoever he actually was, realized the value of the Honjo Masamune and kept it as a personal war trophy. American servicemen were generally permitted to take swords home as war trophies. It's very plausible that the Honjo Masamune was kept by the officer who took it. If so, it may have been quietly passed down in that person's family, or otherwise changed hands in private after the war. That is to say, you could have Grandpa Coldy's Honjo Masamune hanging above your fireplace. Another theory is that Coldy Bymore was made up by someone in the Japanese police who knew the value of the sword. Under this theory, this individual knew that a Tokugawa descendant dropped off rare and valuable swords and fabricated a story about an American serviceman coming to grab it. Unfamiliar with American naming conventions, this individual thought up the absurd name Coldy Bymore and kept the sword for himself. Other theories consider that it may be held in a private collection, and the reason why it hasn't been returned is that it was purchased on the black market. Occasional claims and rumors have popped up. For example, excitement brewed in 2013 when a long-lost Masamune sword turned up at the Kyoto National Museum. However, it turned out to be a different blade, the Shimazu Masamune, which hadn't had a verified sighting since 1862. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to share this video with your friends and on your socials. Also make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you're always notified whenever I drop new content. In August 1942, a routine U.S. Navy patrol over the Pacific Ocean turned into a baffling mystery that remains unsolved to this day. During World War II, the U.S. Navy made use of blimps to patrol the coasts and guard against enemy submarines. In the early months of the war, Japanese submarines had prowled the west coast, sinking several ships and even shelling targets in California and Oregon. In response, the Navy bolstered its coastal defenses by deploying blimps for surveillance. The L-8 was one of a series of small L-class non-rigid airships originally built by Goodyear for advertising, which the Navy acquired to help patrol American shores. Though modest in size and crew, usually just 2 men, these blimps proved useful for spotting signs of enemy submarines and could even attack with small depth bombs. The L-8 blimp itself had an interesting history leading up to the incident. It took part in a notable mission in April 1942, delivering vital parts to the aircraft carrier USS Hornet in the Pacific, as that ship headed out to launch the Doolittle raid. By the summer of 1942, Blimp L-8 was based at Treasure Island near San Francisco and assigned routine anti-submarine patrols along the California coast. Its 2-man crew on August 16, 1942, consisted of Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and Ensign Charles Ellis Adams, both U.S. Navy aviators with experience in airship operations. On the morning of August 16, 1942, L-8 lifted off from Treasure Island at around 6 a.m. for a patrol over the Pacific waters just outside San Francisco Bay. Conditions were calm and slightly overcast, and visibility was good for several miles. The blimp's mission was to scour the ocean surface for any sign of enemy submarines within a 50-mile radius. After about an hour and a half of flight, as L-8 passed over the Golden Gate and headed toward the Farallon Islands, the crew radioed in a routine position report. At 7:42 a.m., Lieutenant Cody sent a message, quote, "Am investigating suspicious oil slick. Stand by." This was a significant report since oil on the water could indicate a submarine lurking below. It was the last communication ever received from the blimp. When L-8 failed to check in as scheduled, the Navy grew concerned. Repeated calls to the blimp went unanswered. By 8:20 a.m., the airship's radio silence had been noticed, and by 8:50 a.m., the Navy dispatched 2 aircraft to search for the missing blimp. At around 10:50 a.m., a Pan American Airways pilot reported spotting an L-class blimp floating over the Golden Gate Bridge, apparently under control and heading back toward base. Minutes later, another search plane saw the blimp near the coast, rising through the low clouds at about 2,000 feet. It became clear this was L-8. However, the blimp's movements soon grew erratic. Around 11:15 a.m., to the surprise of onlookers, L-8 suddenly descended out of the clouds and came down near Ocean Beach, just south of San Francisco. 2 Army coastal defense soldiers and local fishermen who saw the blimp dropping rushed to grab its guide ropes as the 150-foot airship brushed the beach sand. The gondola door was found hanging open, and inside everything appeared normal, except that the 2 crewmen were missing. Before the astonished would-be rescuers could secure the blimp, it lightened and gently rose back up into the air. L-8 drifted inland, cleared a coastal cliff, and slowly floated over the city. About 15 minutes later, the empty blimp deflated and settled gently down onto a street in Daly City, a suburb just outside San Francisco. Navy personnel and local authorities immediately swarmed the scene of L-8's very soft crash landing. They found the airship largely undamaged. The blimp's engines were idle, there was fuel in the tanks, and the radio was in working order. The cabin door had been latched open, suggesting it was intentionally propped that way during flight. Inside the gondola, all the required safety equipment was present and properly stowed, including a rubber life raft and 2 parachutes, but 2 inflatable life vests were missing. Those life vests were standard gear that Cody and Adams would have been wearing while flying over water. Aside from the crew, nothing else had vanished from the blimp. There was no sign of fire, struggle, or malfunction. Investigators even checked the blimp's bilge, the bottom compartment, and found a layer of dust, confirming that L-8 had never touched down on the ocean. In other words, it hadn't crashed or landed in the water at any point, causing the men to bail out. The 2 men had simply gone missing in midair. The Navy launched an extensive search along the coast, but no trace of Lieutenant Cody or Ensign Adams was ever found. The disappearance of L-8's crew left everyone grasping for answers. The official Navy investigation ultimately concluded that the most likely cause was a tragic accident during the patrol. The Navy surmised that one of the men might have opened the cabin door to investigate the oil slick, leaned out too far, and fallen from the blimp at low altitude. The second man, realizing his crewmate was in trouble, could have hurried to the open door and also been pulled out or lost his balance in an attempt to save him. This scenario would explain why the door was latched open and why both life vests were gone. With the sudden loss of two people, the blimp would have quickly become lighter and risen out of control, which is consistent with its observed behavior throughout the morning. The Navy considered this the most plausible explanation and labeled the incident an involuntary abandonment of the airship. Even so, officials acknowledged two nagging points that kept the case mysterious. No one on the sea's surface reported seeing the men fall, and much more curiously, no bodies or any other evidence was ever recovered. Over the years, many other theories have been floated to explain what might have happened to Cody and Adams in those fateful moments. Some proposed an enemy action, for example, that a Japanese submarine surfaced and somehow abducted the crew. Others pointed to possible foul play or human drama, with rumors ranging from a secret stowaway hiding on board who overpowered the men, to one crewman slaying the other. This last theory, which is pure speculation, points to the possibility of a personal dispute, which dramatically led to the dying man pulling the perpetrator out of the blimp. While this definitely has a Hollywood quality to it, I have to stress that this narrative is essentially straight-up fiction, with the only piece of evidence being that both men went missing. More outlandish theories have also been suggested, including rogue waves and alien abductions, but again, there's simply no evidence to suggest these events actually occurred. Personally, I think the Navy's investigation here likely got it right, at least on a balance of probabilities. And yes, that is to say that we will never know for sure what happened to these men, but we can have a fairly good idea.